Vandermeulen, Training Coordinator for Wisconsin Facets. I'd like to welcome you all to our IEP Revisions and Extended School Year mini webinar. So let's get started. On your screen, you'll see the topics we're going to cover today. First, we'll cover information about making revisions to a child's IEP. Then we'll cover a bit about extended school year, or as we refer to it as ESY for short. One of your handouts for today is of all the PowerPoint slides that you will be seeing on your screen today. Another handout that I'll be referring to is entitled Special Education in Plain Language. You will be using this resource for all 11 IEP mini webinars. It's about 80 pages long, and you'll see that it's important to keep a copy of this particular handout because you will be using it. And I would suggest having a hard copy, and you can get a hard copy either from your school district or you can contact Wisconsin Facets for a copy. The 2019 version is our most recent version of this handout. There is a link on your More Resources handout to the searchable online version as well. IEP Review and Revision starts on page 37 and ESY starts on page 33. First, I want to quickly hit some of the high points about the IEP from previous webinars in this series. The cornerstone of the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA for short, is the entitlement of each eligible child with a disability to a free, appropriate public education, or for short, FAPE. The main vehicle for providing FAPE is through an approximately developed and an appropriately developed and implemented Individual Education Program, or as we usually refer to it as IEP. In your More Resources handout for today, there is a link to Wisconsin DPI number 18.02 for more information about FAPE. The IEP is what we call the heart of a child's special education. It is a written plan designed to meet the needs of the individual child with a disability. It is developed by the child's IEP team, which includes the child's parents. A current IEP must be in place for each eligible child at the start of every school year. The IEP is a legal commitment, meaning if it is in writing, the IEP the school district has, that they are obligated to provide it to the student. In previous webinars in this IEP series, we have reviewed what goes into developing a good IEP. But what happens, for example, if a child's IEP doesn't seem to be working? First, we'll look at the things that are involved in making revisions to a child's IEP. So, how do you know if a child's IEP really isn't working? And how do you know if you should ask for a revision? It is important for both the parents and the school to be able to track a child's annual IEP goals and the progress being made on each goal all through the school year. In writing the IEP Part 2, the 6th in our webinar series, we learned that parents of students with disabilities must be informed periodically about their child's progress toward meeting each annual IEP goal. We learned that progress toward the annual IEP goals must be reported at least as often as parents of general education students receive reports. So typically, the progress report on annual IEP goals coincides with regular report card time. But if parents feel it is important to have more frequent progress updates, then whatever increased frequency they think is important should be documented in the IEP. So maybe it'll be every month or even every other month, or just once or twice a semester. That is strictly up to the parents and those involved in the IEP process. Also, in writing the IEP Part 2, we learned that many schools use Wisconsin Form I-6, Review of IEP Goals, to document progress reports to parents. The link to this form is on your More Resources handout. It is important for parents to stay on top of the progress being made on their child's annual goals and to carefully read the periodic progress reports that they will receive. If you look at Form I-6 on your screen, you can see that each annual goal is listed in column 2. That column 3 shows measurement of where the child is currently, and the next column has a checkbox, either a yes or a no, for if the student is making sufficient progress to meet the annual goal during the term of the IEP. And the last column is how the IEP must be revised to address any lack or to encourage progress. In between getting the periodic progress reports from the school, parents can even use Form I-6 themselves at home to track their child's progress. Sometimes what the parent sees the child is doing at home may be different from what the school is seeing. Maybe the child is having trouble with homework or is super frustrated with certain things in school. This is important information to share with the school. Some school districts just fill in the information for one period, so parents sometimes make a chart themselves so they can track their child's progress from one reporting period to the next. Excuse me. Here's an example of a chart that Chiffon's parents are using to track her periodic progress reports. There are 4 annual goals in her IEP. You can see goals 1, 2, 3, and 4 across the bottom of the chart. The purple bars are the targets for her annual goals, where she is expected to be by the end of a current school year IEP. You can see that the first purple bar is 75%, her target for goal number 1. And look at the other 3 purple bars. 85% is the annual goal for Chiffon's number 2 goal, 85% for goal 3, and 75% for goal 4. Chiffon's IEP calls for 4 periodic progress reports to her parents. The orange bars are for the first report period, the blue bars for the second. Reports 3 and 4 have not happened yet, so no bars appear on your screen. Just by looking at this example, which annual goals do you think Chiffon has a good chance of meeting by the end of this IEP? So look at the orange and the blue bars from the first 2 reporting periods for each of the 4 goals. See which one looks like it's increasing, which ones are getting much closer to the purple bars. And all of a sudden my screen has stopped. There we go. Goal 2 and goal 4 are highlighted just at this time now, and you can see in those 2 goals there was some progress made. My computer is not cooperating at this time. So as you can see, those are the 2 that are probably the closest to her meeting her goals. Goal 1 and goal 3 are not there yet and probably need to be looked at a bit more closely because we want to make sure that these 2 goals will be met. In between getting the periodic progress reports from the school, parents can use Form I-6 themselves at home to track their child's progress. Sometimes what parents see the child is doing at their home is real important, and again, as we mentioned before, different from what the school is seeing. So let's move on. So what do parents do when they review the periodic progress report and it seems that their child is not progressing at the rate that they expected? Here are some things that parents can do if they think their child's IEP might not be working. Parents should first think about how long the child's IEP has been in place. If it is just the first reporting period, for example, or maybe the IEP has been in place only a few weeks or a month or two, it may be too early to have good data to determine if the special education and related services, accommodations, and supports are working. If it is longer, like we saw in Chiffon's example, after 2 progress reporting periods, it looked like she was not making good progress on goal 2 of her annual goals, and it would be important to look further into what might be happening. Next, parents should consider contacting the child's teacher to share their concerns that they have about their child's lack of progress. Questions that parents can ask may include some of the things that are listed on your screen. Are all the services, supports, and accommodations listed in the IEP being implemented regularly and in writing? Are all the teachers, for example, and the related services people following the IEP? Is the child actually using all of these accommodations on a regular basis? So asking things as, have the accommodations been explained to the child? Does the teacher think that the child understands how and when to use such accommodations? Does the teacher think additional or different accommodations might help the child to make better progress toward their goal? Can the teacher maybe share some work samples, for example, so the parent might ask for some of those work samples so that they can actually see what's going on and what's happening and what the child's work may look like? Can the teacher suggest some ways that parents can support the IEP at home? And also, it is helpful for parents to keep a journal. And this is the next statement on your slide there for keeping a communication log. A communication log can keep track of interactions with the school and the IEP team. And I would very much suggest that if you find that communication is difficult with a child's teacher or with several of the teachers, a communication log is a very effective tool. A parent can use this to document when they share concerns, with whom, what the concerns were, and what the response of the school was. This is also a place to attach work samples that we just talked about. For example, if extended time wasn't provided on a specific test, note the date in the journal and attach a copy of the test. So you always have the documentation necessary to show that the child, is not meeting the needs, their own needs, because the accommodations haven't been appropriately followed. Finally, the parent may consider asking for an IEP revision meeting to discuss this progress or lack of progress with the IEP team and revise the IEP as needed. So let's take a first look at what the law requires related to the IEP review and revision. IDEA and Wisconsin Chapter 115 both require that the public agency, or at this consideration, the school district, must ensure that the IEP team review the child's IEP periodically, but not less than annually, so at least once a year, to determine if the annual goals for that child are being achieved. Excuse me. The IEP team must review and revise the IEP more than just once a year. Remember, the IEP team includes the parent, a special education teacher, a regular education teacher, the LEA, which is the local education agency representative, and related services staff. The law says that the IEP team revises the IEP as appropriate to address 1, the lack of expected progress toward the annual goals and or lack of progress in the general ed curriculum if appropriate. So an example of that would be Chiffon not making progress to some of her goals that we listed in the past, and that would be a reason to ask for an IEP review or revision. Another reason could be that a child has met all of these annual goals already, and then we need to revise those goals to make additional goals that the child can achieve. Information from any new evaluation or reevaluation that has taken place, and information or concerns shared by the parent or the teacher. So when new information is available about the child. For example, a student who has been receiving services for a learning disability may later be diagnosed with ADHD and require additional services or modifications. The child's anticipated needs or any new needs that need to be addressed. For example, in this case, a speech therapist might recommend a new modification to the classroom environment to support the child with dyslexia. Also, number 2 would be other matters or issues or concerns. By law, either the parents or the school can request an IEP meeting at any time to revise the child's IEP. The fact that the IEP was written for the year does not mean that it is necessarily appropriate for an entire year. The child grows and the child develops. There are things that are progressing and there are things that are not progressing. We know that the child's needs will continue to change as they grow. Parents should put their request for an IEP review or revision and an in-person IEP meeting in writing. A letter isn't required by law, but it is what we call a best practice to put the request in writing. We have told people in the past that if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. In the letter, parents should describe any concerns and reasons they are requesting an in-person IEP team meeting to review and revise the IEP. As a side note, in-person can also mean a virtual meeting, like a Zoom meeting, with the whole IEP team present, quote, live and able to talk and share ideas. And of course, this has become increasingly more popular since our pandemic. So when we talk about live, it can be, quote, in-person or in-person virtually. It is more likely that the IEP team will agree to the changes and amend the IEP if the parent thoroughly explains the reasons for the proposed change and how it would help the child's progress. For example, if the school speech therapist informs the parent that the child might make better progress with 3 sessions a week in speech therapy instead of 2, then the parent should include specific details of that particular conversation in the writing request for the IEP review and revision. When a review and revision meeting has been requested, the school district will confirm that an IEP team meeting has been scheduled by sending the parent what we call a notice of meeting of the IEP team, which is the Wisconsin DPI sample form I-1. The link to the I-1 form is in your More Resources handout. Under the section that says the purpose of this IEP team meeting, review/revise IEP, should be checked. As we learned in the IEP webinar in this series called Writing the IEP Part 1, the names of all the IEP team members who will attend that meeting are also required on this particular form. Special education in plain language has information about review and revision of the IEP on pages 37 and 38. Under what a parent needs to know, there is a tip about what information the parents can bring to this meeting. And this is really some important stuff that I would suggest that you pay close attention to. The parent should ask, do you know of any of the needs that need to be looked at in your child's IEP? Is there anything new that needs to be added? Do you know of anything that needs to be worked on? So these are all things that parents could be keeping track of so that they can bring it forward in this meeting. It is helpful to the rest of the IEP team if parents can come to the meeting with specific examples about changes in their child or areas where they believe that their child has not made gains and what accommodations, supports, and services that they think might be helpful to add or to change. For an in-person meeting to review and revise the IEP team will first make a new cover sheet for the IEP. In Wisconsin, this form is known as I-3. Review/revise the IEP would be checked as the purpose of the meeting, and all IEP team members attending would be listed. The link to this I-3 form is also in your More Resources handout. The IEP team will then discuss all the needed changes to the IEP. All the changes are written on a new IEP form. In Wisconsin, this form is called the I-4 form, and as we learned before in some of our other webinars, it is also known as the linking form. This includes any changes in the annual goals, any changes to the 4 program sections, and we refer to those 4 program sections as supplementary aids and services, special ed or specially designed instruction, related services, or program modifications and supports for school staff. And also any changes in the frequency, the location, and the duration column of those 4 program sections. When the IEP is revised, the duration of the IEP date stays the same. And this is something to keep in mind. It must stay the same. So if the original IEP was from April 4, 2020 to April 3 of 2021, it was revised in November of 2020, then the date of the revision of the IEP will be listed and still stay as April 4, 2020 to April 3, 2021. The LEA, or the local education services person that's in attendance, must providing the parent with a copy of the revised IEP with all the changes made. People ask if it is legal for a school to change an IEP without an IEP meeting. Under both IDEA 2004 and Wisconsin law, the short answer is yes. Revisions to the IEP can be made without an in-person meeting of the IEP team. As I just mentioned, an in-person meeting can also be a virtual meeting. So while the IEP must be developed initially by the IEP team, revisions to the IEP can be made without an actual live meeting of the IEP team. Amending the IEP without a live meeting of the IEP team may be done only if both the parent and the school agree. If they both agree, then usually the parent and someone from the IEP team talk about the revision that's needed to the IEP. Then the school develops a written document to amend or modify the child's IEP. Sometimes it is just changing a few parts of the IEP or a few pages of the IEP itself. A copy of the child's updated IEP must be provided to the parents. And if parents don't get a copy of it, you must ask for one because it's very important to have the updated copy at all times. The school must also record how they inform the rest of the IEP team of the changes made to the IEP. The law doesn't require all the IEP team to get a copy of the changes, so that's why it's so important for either parents or the school to notify all of those teachers who will be involved in administrating the child's IEP of such changes. In Wisconsin, Form I-10, Notice of Changes to an IEP Team Without a Meeting, is used for this progress. This is one of your handouts today. The I-10 is used to document that the parents and the school both agree to change the child's IEP without a meeting. In order to make changes without a meeting, the parent must agree to those changes. The form has to include what the changes to the IEP are. It also has to include the reasons for making these changes. That is, why the school proposes to make these changes and a description of each evaluation procedure, record, assessment, or report that the school used as a basis for these particular changes. Any other options considered, if any, and why they were rejected must also be listed, or any other relevant factors for these changes. If no options were considered, then the none box must be checked. The I-10 form serves as what is called the prior written notice, required to be given to parents, in that it includes the date that the changes were agreed upon and also the changes that will take place. This notice must be provided using this form in a reasonable time before implementation. It should be noted that only the child's IEP team can make these decisions about a change in placement. So if a change in educational placement is being considered, which means either increasing or decreasing the amount of time that a child is in special education, then the whole IEP team must meet in person. It also should be noted that parents do not have to agree with these changes to their child's IEP without a meeting. If it is not a big change, parents may want to agree to make the changes without a meeting if they agree with these particular changes. This will save time for everybody, for the parent and for members of the IEP team. But if the changes seem to the parent to be more involved or they think might require more discussion by the whole IEP team, then they would rather ask for an IEP in-person meeting with the whole team to revise the IEP. Federal special education requirements establish the standard for developing and determining if a child is eligible for an extended school year. And we are going to, at this time, talk more about extended school year services, or for short, ESY. The standard is that schools must provide ESY services to children who need it in order to receive what we call, again, the Free Appropriate Public Education, or FAPE for short. That standard is pretty general. So let's look in more detail here about what ESY services are and how IEP teams can decide if ESY services are needed for the child. So we ask ourselves, what are ESY services? First, I must clarify that ESY is not regular summer school. Summer school is what is called a permissive program. That is a program typically operated by a school on a set schedule for a number of weeks during the summer. Not all school districts even offer a regular summer school. A school district is not required to develop and implement an IEP for children with disabilities who want to attend regular summer school programs. A school district is also not required to provide regular services such as transportation for children with disabilities for regular summer school programs. IDEA defines ESY as special education and related services provided to students with disabilities beyond the regular school year. Summer is generally the longest break from the normal school year, but ESY can also be implemented during shorter breaks, for example, during the winter and during the spring holiday breaks, as an example. ESY Services can also be the extension of a school day or the children's normal school day, such as like a special tutoring program after school. IDEA says that ESY services must be provided only if the child's IEP team determines on an individual basis that the services are necessary for the provision of what we call, again, the free appropriate public education, or FAPE. So basically, not all children with disabilities need ESY services. Also, a child may need ESY services one year and not the next. Each child is different. IDEA says that ESY services must be provided at no cost to the parent of that child. And finally, IDEA says that the school district may not limit ESY services to only certain disability categories. And this has been tried before, and may not unilaterally limit the time, the amount, or the duration of these services. So let me give you an example. A school district may not have a policy that restricts ESY services to the same period of time that it conducts the regular school summer school program for all students. These ESY requirements are in IDEA on the citation at the bottom of your screen and also on your More Services handout, More Resources handout. So as you can see below the picture on that slide, the 34 CFR 300.106 is the citation that you might want to take a look at. How does the IEP team determine if a child needs ESY services? We have already covered a few of the regulations in IDEA about ESY services. There are no Wisconsin state regulations addressing how to decide when a child needs ESY services, and sometimes this can be frustrating. Fortunately, the courts have provided some guidance that IEP teams can use to determine if a child needs ESY services. Most of the ESY services related in U.S. court cases have focused on what we call skill regression and skill recruitment problems. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, which includes Wisconsin, has said that, and it states that we should engage in multi-factor determination of eligibility for ESY services, including, quote, the likelihood of regression, slow recoupment, and predictive data based on the opinion of professionals. So this basically means that ESY is what we call a multi-factor determination. So the IEP team has to look at many different factors, and that it is not necessary for a student to demonstrate previous regression in order to be eligible for ESY services. The determination should be based on objective data from a variety of sources. So here is a list of many factors that the IEP team could look at when considering if a child needs ESY. this list is not the only things that the IEP team could consider. A child doesn't have to meet all of these items, and not only one item controls the decision of whether a child should have ESY or not. And there are some examples there on your slide that I'd like to bring to your attention. I won't read them to you at this time, but here are some examples. So there's one that may be listed that talks about emerging skills. If the student is at a breakthrough point in a critical skill or skills such as reading, you might want to take a look at pursuing the ESY in that area. We want to also look at the availability of alternative resources, or also look at one of the child's vocational needs, for example, or how fast a child can learn. It is important to know that a member of the IEP team must ask if the child needs ESY services in order for the team to discuss if ESY services are needed. If no one asks, then the team does not have to discuss the need for ESY services. So again, a parent is a part of the IEP team. So if the parent feels their child needs ESY, they can ask for ESY services to be discussed. It is helpful for parents to ask and to discuss ESY way before a school break, as by March, for example, at the end of the school year. You want to be taking a look at your child's progress toward their goals and whether or not you think your child is going to meet those goals by the designated times. Parents can discuss these concerns about whether they think that their child will have possible loss of skills, that we refer to as regression. Parents can also share their thoughts about how long they think it takes for their child to regain skills after a long vacation. And we would call this, for example, recoupment after such breaks as winter or spring or summer breaks. Helpful guidance about ESY is in the Wisconsin DPI Bulletin number 10.02. The link for this bulletin is on your resources slide coming up next. ESY services are written in the IEP. In Wisconsin, most schools add an extra form to the IEP. This form is called I-11, Extended School Year. Form I-11 is also one of your handouts, and we'll go through it quickly at this point. Form I-11 is a kind of a program summary for ESY. We covered the program summary in writing the IEP Part 3, which is the 7th in the IEP series. The program summary section of the annual IEP describes the services and the supports a child will have and need to be provided in order to meet the needs and their annual goals. And you can get that information on a webinar recording if you weren't able to listen to that before. So Form I-11 looks pretty much like the regular IEP form and summary form, but will also include only what the child will have provided in order to meet their ESY needs and goals. On the I-11 form, the IEP team has to list which of the child's disability-related needs from the existing IEP will be addressed through ESY services. These needs are listed in the far right-hand corner of that particular form. Next, the IEP team must decide what goals are needed to meet the ESY needs. ESY is not necessarily a continuation of all of the annual goals that are on the child's existing IEP form. ESY goals can include some or all of the annual goals written exactly as they were in the child's existing IEP. Also, the annual goals can include some or all of the annual goals, modified somehow from the child's existing IEP, or it can also include new goals just for ESY and can be written. You can see on Form I-11 that the goals are listed in the second column on the right. The next, the IEP team must describe all those supports and services that will be provided during ESY to meet the child's ESY needs and goals. This will include such things as supplementary aids and services, and some of those are listed for you, like special education and specially designed instruction, related services, program modifications or other supports for school personnel. On the IEP 11 form, these are all listed on the far left column. It is possible that all 4 types of services may not be required for ESY. Some students may only need certain services outside of the normal school year. For example, a student may just need reading instruction or physical therapy during ESY, and it is possible for ESY services to only include related services such as speech or occupational therapy. Across the top of the Form I-11, you can also see where their services are discussed as frequency, amount, location, and duration of all of those described services. Writing the IEP Part 4, the 8th in this particular IEP series, gives you much more detailed information about the frequency, the amount, the location, and this description of each. And again, if you weren't able to participate in that, you can sign up for that on our Wisconsin Facets website. So let's take a look at some of the resources that we've been talking about before, and we've mentioned those to you. All of those are available in your More Resources handout. And at this time, we would love to have you complete the evaluation that will be coming to you after our live presentation today. Again, if you have any questions about today's topic or want to ask particular questions about today's topic to someone, a live person, please feel free to type your questions in the question box. Our series of our mini webinars are not necessarily meant to be interactive in nature. So if you have specific questions, you can call our main line, and that telephone number is listed for you. Or you can also type a question to us on our website at wifacets.org. Thank you at this time for your participation today. Please be reminded that we have our next webinar in our series coming up next week, and some of you might want to register for that if you haven't done so already. And we have 2 left in our series, number 10 and number 11, so please feel free to sign up for those. We'd like to thank you all again for attending today. That is the end of our webinar for today. Thank you all and have a great day. Bye-bye.